Berserk is a series which I can only think to describe in one word, and that is a masterpiece. A word which I usually only use whilst describing my favourite series, like One Piece, The Promised Neverland, and hilariously, K-On! But for Berserk, I feel as if it would be wrong to describe it as anything else, as Berserk manages to master its story, characters, and above all else, its art, which feels as if it should be in some sort of fancy art gallery in France. And in this video, I intend on talking all about this series with minor spoilers in case you leave this video wanting to experience it yourself. But before we take a dive into this magnificent story, I wish to warn all of you that Berserk is an extremely dark story that covers topics which may unsettle some viewers, and though I intend not to spoil much, I will be discussing some things that are not suitable for a younger audience or anyone who is a bit squeamish. But without further ado, let us plunge into the deep depths of Berserk. Kentaro Miura has constructed an extremely rich story over his many years of creating Berserk, which is packed full of mysteries and shocking moments to last a lifetime. Firstly, I would like to discuss the Golden Age arc, which was single-handedly the longest backstory I have ever read in my lifetime. But I'm not complaining, as it was a wonderful arc that in retrospect feels like a completely different story than the one we have today, purely due to the differences in the world, I suppose. Also, the Golden Age arc has one of the most brutal sections I have ever read, which I won't discuss in depth, so hopefully you can go into it blind, unlike me, that was already bracing myself for a whole day, and it still hit me like a truck. And though I've only talked about the Golden Age arc so far, that doesn't mean it's the only good arc. In fact, it's quite the opposite, as it isn't even my favourite arc, as that's reserved for the one and only Millennium Falcon arc. I knew I would enjoy the Millennium Falcon arc, but even then I didn't expect to enjoy it as much as I did. The arc was full of moments that made me both shocked and excited, and I loved seeing both Guts and Griffith's stories side by side, and then converge for a brief amount of time, which I thought was simply fantastic. But before we continue on to talking about the characters of Berserk, I would like to discuss an arc that kinda acts as a bridge between arcs, but that doesn't mean it ain't good. The arc I'm referring to is the Conviction arc, which took a look at a sort of religious side of the world, and how God and church would affect people, but also included stuff in it that I didn't know were allowed to be shown. Like, mass groups of heretics and torture chambers with extremely graphic detail. But, let's be honest, it's no secret that Berserk is dark, but this arc was on a whole nother level, as it showed some of the most vile panels I have ever seen in manga. For example, the disgusting goat man and his cult of drug-addicted nudists, and that's just to name one of the many brutal things that happens in this arc. But even though Berserk includes some of the most disgusting things I have ever read, the story is incredible, and I've only just scratched the surface with the stuff I have discussed in this video. There are two main characters I'd like to discuss, but before that I want to talk about my favourite character, and that is the one and only Puck the Elf, who is around for a majority of the story, even making a small cameo in the Golden Age arc, and this is because Puck's sole purpose as a character is to be the comic relief, which in a story like Berserk, people may find him jarring, it's so dark, but I think Berserk would be a little too much for anyone without the Lord and Saviour Puck, who literally sleeps with a Baelet, an amulet which can reincarnate you into an apostle, an all-powerful being, which, at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter. It just doesn't really matter, because at the end of the day, it's just his best buddy in the whole damn world. But now that we are done talking about Puck, let's talk about the main character and his nemesis, who is one of the most evil characters ever created. Firstly, Guts, the main character, is a character that can only be described by a 14-year-old on Facebook or Reddit, as he is deep. This is because Guts starts off the series as an extremely cynical person who cares little about himself or the people around him. But then, we enter the Golden Age arc where we see his nightmarish childhood and his life going forward, where he finally finds a place where he can belong and in a way, a family of his own. but later has it taken all away from him. However, we do start to see Guts open up again throughout the series, with the first sign of this being his friendship with Puck, who beforehand he only pushes away. Honestly, I found it really charming reading Berserk and seeing Guts becoming a better person again, and even acting as somewhat of a big brother to the group he now travels with. Overall, Guts warms my heart, but I can't say the same about Griffith. Griffith is one of, if not the most diabolical characters I have ever seen represented in a story, full stop. However, he is incredibly well written, as we see his rise, fall, and rise again. Griffith is a character that starts off as a friend and ally of the main character, Guts, only to betray him and everyone else to achieve his goal no matter the cost. The only way I can think to describe him is a baby-faced psychotic maniac, who always ends up tormenting Guts to a point where it would be a bit surprising if Guts didn't partially lose his mind. But the bit that makes Griffith such a good antagonist is how everyone else in the world sees him. What I mean by this is that most of the time Griffith is shown, he's made out to be some beautiful white knight who is a hero who stops wars and brings prosperity to the people of the world. However, in reality, we know that this is not in fact the case. I also find it impressive how Griffith is shown in comparison to Guts, who looks more sinister and nightmarish a good portion of the time. Overall, I think both Guts and Griffith are extremely complex and well-written characters, but before we continue on into talking about the art of Berserk, I would quickly like to mention two other characters, in minor detail of course. Firstly, I want to praise the character of Roderick, who I thought would be a typical arranged marriage dickhead of a husband. Instead, he subverted my expectations to the point where I might cry if he dies, because he's such a chill guy who constantly comes in clutch. Like, it's not the love. However, I cannot say the same for the next character I wish to discuss, which is Wild, who is one of the only characters in Berserk I dislike in both how he's written and just him as a character, as he just felt needlessly evil, to the point where I had to hold down vomit as I saw his octopus dick come out of his mouth. Ugh, truly disgusting, and I'm gonna say it, that horse-faced piece of excrement deserved to die way sooner than he actually did. But at least his death is satisfying when Nosferatu Zod, no relation to Dracula of course, rips him in half. But overall, aside from Wild, Kentaro Miura very rarely missed with the characters in Berserk, and I've only talked about a brief few in relatively small detail, but there are plenty of other videos out there discussing the likes of Griffith and Guts as characters, so I recommend watching those if you want to get a deeper dive into them. But yeah, let's move on to the art of Berserk. Berserk's art is on a whole other level to 90% of other manga series out there. This is because Kentaro Miura has an extremely good understanding of a bunch of different things. But before we get into that, I'd like to say I'm going to go a little off my script for this next part, because turns out I wasn't actually very good at portraying what I was thinking onto my script, so I'm just going to articulate it with my words. Hooray! So firstly, I want to discuss the armor in Berserk, and you're probably thinking, why of all things could I discuss, would I discuss the armor? And now there's good reason for this, and that's because in many other series, you'll see armor and it'll be the most basic thing imaginable. Maybe like a cape, a leather strap, or like a little bit around the chest or the shoulder maybe, and a cape. That's pretty much the bog standard of fantasy series these days, but Berserk is completely different. Berserk's armor is so well designed that I think it might need to be in a museum, because it just completely changes the format. You see armor that is so absolutely detailed that it is incredible. For example, the Blue Whale Knights, Guts' Berserker armor are two very good examples. I love the Blue Whale Knights because they've got a sort of fish theme going on, except for their general, who's maybe got like a lobster or starfish, at least I think he was their general. And of course Guts' Berserker armor, because it looks fantastic, especially when the sort of like wolf sort of thing, or maybe it's a dog, a hound that Guts is sort of like got with him, just shuts over his head, and it's such a cool idea for an armor that the more he uses it, the more he's at risk. Obviously a system like that isn't exactly new, obviously people have been doing that for a while, like you can use this power, but at the risk of your life. And that's not exactly a new concept, but, you know, with Guts, I think it was very interesting to see just how much it affected him after one go. Like, to see his, like, a white streak in his hair, like, him aging so much. I thought that was good. I thought that was good. I like the armor in Berserk. I like how it affects designs and stuff. I thought it was very good. But yeah, that's all I have to say in armor. Now let's move on to some, well, movements, which I think are very beautifully designed. Alright, so next I would like to quickly discuss movements in Berserk. You're probably wondering, why am I talking about this? Probably like you were thinking, why am I talking about armor? But here we are. So the reason I want to talk about it is Kentaro Miura obviously has a very good understanding of how characters should move, how they should flow, and, well, how their bodies should act in his world. For example, how they sword fight, how they just move in general. Not to mention, and I think this is a good example, horses in Berserk, which are incredibly designed, and the way he's drawn them to, like, sort of gallop in a way, I think is very good and very impressive. So, yeah, I just think movements in Berserk, and I think it's a very minor thing, but it does the story a great service. Well, maybe not the story, but the whole thing, the entirety of Berserk as a whole. Alright, so I'd quickly like to discuss character design in Berserk, and now there is a specific part I would like to talk about, but before we get on to that, I'd quickly like to discuss Puck and Guts. I think both of them are great examples of character design. Now, Puck starts with a story, very sort of simplistic design, not too complicated, but as Kentaro Miura's art gets better, so does Puck, you know, as every character would. But Puck, he goes from quite simplistic to looking absolutely gorgeous to turning into a chestnut for purely comedic effect. But, you know, I'm not against it because I really like it. Chestnut Puck is one of the funniest things I have seen in a long time, and seeing him take money off a bunch of noble people as a cost for their life is one of the funniest things I have ever seen. And now Guts, however, Guts is different. Guts is a masterclass in character design. Guts' character design represents him as a person. Guts starts off the story a very cynical and bad person, like I've told you in the characters section, but then, as we see him grow as a person, so does his character design. He looks more happy, he looks calmer, he looks like a better person. And I think his character design does a great job at portraying the difference between him at the beginning of the story to him at the end of the story. But now that I'm done with talking about Guts and Puck, I'd quickly like to move on to the Apostles. Alright, now that I've talked about Guts and Puck on a character design level, I'd quickly like to talk about the Apostles, which I think are a masterclass in design. All of them now. Even though I think Wild is disgusting, he is incredibly well designed. He's designed to look like an asshole, and he is an asshole. Well, that may be a bit of a light term for him, but you know, I just can't think of words to describe someone that bad. I've already said what I think about him, so we're going to move on. But no, the Apostles are extremely well designed, and I think they all take a sort of Lovecraftian cosmic horror vibe when they're all designed, because I think Kentaro Miura must have taken inspiration from that sort of design element, because they all look very cosmic horror-esque, but that certainly isn't a bad thing. In fact, it works incredible and makes them look absolutely horrific. Like, I was seeing a scene from the anime. Now, I watched the manga, but I saw a bit of a scene from the anime of the eclipse, and I saw one with his head and he had mouth on each side of his head, eyes on both sides, and a tongue on the top, and he had two tongues coming out of each of the mouths on each side of his head. Absolutely disgusting, and I don't want to see it again. But that is just next level. That is like some strange ass shit, and I wouldn't have been able to come up with it. But it does look horrific, and I think the Apostles do a great job when looking like horrifying monsters. But let's move on from that and talk about our next topic. Alright, so the final thing I would like to discuss for the art of Berserk is the time period and the sort of world it's set in, which is a sort of medieval time period, which I think works very well for Berserk. Of course, you know, in our medieval period, we didn't exactly have trolls and dragons flying around, but, you know, that only happened during the Fantasia arc, okay? We don't have to pay any attention to that. But the medieval sort of vibe it gives off is very good. Kentaro Miura has obviously done a lot of research. It's got the whole sort of vibe, the hay roofs, the brick sort of church, very nice looking. And when they go to a port town, the ships look absolutely incredible. They look very suitable for that sort of time period, all connected by like rope and stuff. They look like they should have some sort of pirate on them, and I don't mean One Piece's type of pirate, I mean like real life sort of pirate. And of course we do see pirates, and they are ugly. I mean, I'm gonna say it now, I shouldn't put these pirates down, but they literally turn into tentacle monsters, okay? Come on. But yeah, that is the end of the art section. Now let's move on to the next chapter. Berserk is a series which has had an extremely large impact on media as a whole, with it being pretty much the big daddy of dark fantasy series, but also it's had an impact on gaming. For example, a specific developing company called From Software, who you might know for the creation of one of my favourite games of all time, Elden Ring. They have had such an impact on From Software. From Software, the creator of Dark Souls, Bloodborne, Demon Souls, Elden Ring, they have taken such huge inspiration from Berserk. For example, in Elden Ring, the prisoner class, its helmet is literally based off of Griffith from Berserk. A series that big, a game that huge, which has basically broken the world record for winning the most amount of awards in all of gaming history, is based off of Berserk. If that doesn't give you some slight idea of just how incredible Berserk is and how big of an effect Berserk has had on media as a whole, I don't know what will. Because Elden Ring, and I've talked about Elden Ring before, but Elden Ring is a 10 out of 10 game. And it was inspired. A large portion of things that happened in Elden Ring were inspired by Berserk. And when you think about it like that, you gotta give Berserk some credit. In conclusion, I was absolutely amazed by just how good Berserk was. Not to say I didn't expect it was going to be good from the beginning, but even then I was still amazed by the sheer amount I enjoyed it. From the protagonist to the antagonist, from the disgusting to the beautiful. Berserk is at the end of the day a masterpiece, through and through. But before I end this, I would like to say rest in peace to Kentaro Miura, the creator of Berserk. You made one hell of a good manga, and will go down in history as a legendary mangaka for the rest of time. However, that is the end of the video. I know it's been a bit of a different video in comparison to usual, where I just tend to talk about the story, but here I have decided to focus on what makes it great instead. But I'm not sure if I like it this way, so I'm going to try and find a good blend between these types of videos. Although, with that said, I hope you have enjoyed this video. If you have, make sure to stay tuned for next time, and I'll see you later.